Welcome to the Mentors and Moguls podcast, your source for the inside scoop from some of the world's most accomplished business leaders on how they've achieved success. I'm Heather Stone, your host. Each episode, I dive into a new topic with an inspiring mentor to find out exactly how they achieve goals, overcome obstacles, and slay self-doubt. Today's expert mentoring session is about to start, so grab your pen and let's dive in. Today we're here in New York with the managing partner of Golden Seeds, Loretta McCarthy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Heather.
So I would love to start off by saying, can you please tell our viewers what Golden Seeds actually does?
I'd be delighted to. Golden Seeds was started 14 years ago. We identified at that time that women entrepreneurs were starting over 1/3 of the companies in the United States, but remarkably, they were getting a paltry amount of the capital that was going to startups. In fact, they were fewer than 3% of all the companies that got startup capital. So that was really the moment for Golden Seeds founders, all of whom were women who had come from Wall Street, to say, we can fix this. Certainly, many of these companies have something of great merit that they're doing, but we will never know if they don't get capital. So that's what we did. We started collecting people together to invest in these companies.
Love it, love it. Now, is there any particular type of company, any vein that is more attractive to your firm than others?
There really is no particular industry that we specialize in. Our mantra is we want to find the best women-led companies wherever they are in the United States and in whatever sector they are in. Not surprisingly, more than 50% of the 150 companies that we've invested in are in technology, generally business-to-business technology. But amazingly, about 25% are in healthcare, and the balance are in consumer businesses and media.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Well, let's take you back just a little bit about when did you get started? When did you know that finance was really your thing? Tell us a little bit about how you discovered that.
It's pretty easy for me. I really started as a very, very young person being very interested in business. And whatever had happened, I had a father who was an entrepreneur who I followed very closely in many ways. And I was always very interested in his business, how it worked, how he made money, how he dealt with his employees. So I always had a lot of interest in both marketing and finance of how businesses operate, which was unusual for me as a woman at that stage.
Right. What would you say maybe to someone else that was thinking of entering the same field and kind of following in your footsteps? What advice would you give them? Do they need a specific degree in college? Should they do an internship? What advice would you give them?
My main advice would be just start getting experience wherever you can get it, whether you're volunteering your time, getting internships, observing businesses in action, going and talking to people who run businesses. It's remarkable how much time people are willing to spend with young people if they just want to get to know them, get to know their business, take a tour, whatever it is that might allow them to begin to understand how all of these businesses work.
Right. Do you see any kind of a trend with the women that are coming to you asking for financing? Anything specific come to mind, or is it all across the board?
The main trend in the last 10 or 11 years has simply been the huge numbers of women who are emerging as entrepreneurs. In 2017, 40% of all companies in the United States were women-owned, and that compares to 29% just 11 years earlier. When you think about it, that switch from 29% to 40% in that quite brief period of time says a lot. In fact, women entrepreneurs are growing or starting businesses at 5 times the rate of the U.S. average. So that really means that women entrepreneurs are figuring out that they have the education and the skills and the networks and the swagger and the determination and the grit that we all often have associated with entrepreneurs to start their own businesses, and they're doing it in very large numbers.
Wonderful. So your institution is very specific, angel investment, things like that. What about the banks? Do you see the banks are the banks coming along following suit, or is it still really organizations like yours that are really helping women the most with financing?
Banks are coming along, and other groups of angel investors that invest in startups are beginning to more and more invest in women. Today, I said earlier that 3% of all companies that got startup funding 14 years ago were led by women. I'm really happy to say that 24% of all companies today that get startup funding are started by women. So that's at the very early stages, but it does say that a lot of groups and individuals, and including some banks, have jumped in just to get involved with this population, which is just great. We'll never know what they can do if we don't start funding them.
That's terrific. That's terrific. What do you see for the future, maybe the next 5 years for this trend? Do you think it will stop, slow down, or maybe just people will be more encouraged by seeing other women going before them?
I think it will continue to grow. It's 40%, which is where we are today with women-led businesses, is pretty high, and 24% of all funded companies being women is gotten to a pretty high mark. But we do believe that 45 to 50% of all startups are led by women. So we believe there is room to grow. The main issue for these companies is that so far, when they get funding, women-led companies tend to raise less than men do. Lots of reasons for that. But a real progress will be made in the next 5 years where women are able to attract as much capital, or hopefully as much capital, as men do when they start their businesses. That's because we want to make sure that that they're putting their efforts into growing their businesses and not constantly worrying about raising capital.
Right. Just curious, is there a type of business that speaks to women that women seem to excel at that you've seen emerging recently?
I can't say I've seen it emerge recently, but I will say that from the beginning of time at Golden Seeds, we noticed that women entrepreneurs tend to be attracted to businesses where they are really addressing a problem. They're solving a problem, or they see a gap in the marketplace that they want to fill. And it might be a medical device. It might be a technology issue that they tend to say, there's a problem and I can fix that. Unfortunately, there isn't data around that, so it's anecdotal here at Golden Seeds, but we often will say that's a very specific characteristic of women as entrepreneurs. They like to feel that they're solving some problem that needs to be solved. They feel they can solve it, and they feel they can convince the world to adopt usage of this invention, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. I'm just curious. I ask a lot of women about women's intuition in general. Do you ever use or lean on your gut or your intuition when you're sitting at a pitch table and you're looking at the balance sheets and you're looking at the business plan to make a decision? Does that sway your decision? Does that help you pick a winner?
Yes, absolutely. We all have to use our intuition one way or another. I would posit that women are often very good at that. That is not to say that men are not, but I do feel that here at Golden Seeds, we are 80% women. You do often see a very good assessment of the people and what kind of discussions about what kind of talent they will attract and what kind of leader they will be, and whether you can imagine that this person has what it takes to grow a big business. So a lot of that is in emotional intelligence. I also observe that our members frequently ask questions about their own background and how they got to where they are and why they made decisions along the way. And that's giving them insights that will help them to determine what kind of a leader they'll be in this new place. It would be wrong not to use intuition. It would be equally wrong not to study the business plan and understand the business model. How are they going to make money, and how are they going to, what are their revenue streams? But it's really important to use emotional intelligence as much as you can.
I'd like to follow up with something that you just said, leadership. So can you give our viewers some sort of an idea, maybe 2 or 3 qualities that you and your firm keenly look at when you're assessing a company that's coming to you for funding?
First of all, it's really helpful to know, have they had any experience leading a business, leading a team, leading a class, student council if they're that young? I mean, what has their experience been influencing other people to see the world they see the way they see it? Because ultimately, an entrepreneur is not only an inventor of whatever business, but they are the ones who have to be the chief salesperson for the organization and also the person that carefully selects the talent that will work there. So there's no doubt that they need to be persuasive and nurturing for the people who are there. Remember that in startups, these people are not paying top dollar to attract these people to work in their organizations. It usually takes a while for them to get to that point. So the leadership of the founders often makes all the difference to them in terms of their eagerness to work hard, stay there until that company gets through those tough early stages of being a fully scaled company.
Right. Is education a determining factor when someone comes in to pitch, or is it solely experience or a combination of the two?
It's a combination. Of course, it depends on what they're doing. If they're creating a medical device for heart surgery, we need to know that they have the right kind of education for that. So it can be very relevant. And today, many industries require deep understanding of the domain that they are in. But that's not all there is to it. There are very often times where a company will come and they have a scientist that has created something really interesting, and that person has academic credentials that are very relevant for that. But that same company often decides that they must hire someone else with different credentials, different education to be able to actually run a business.
Right. Do you require or do you assist people that come in, perhaps they have a phenomenal product, but they really don't have the financial background? They don't have a CFO yet. Do you assist with placing people with them that have a good financial and a background and a keen eye for that?
We often do. We all urge all entrepreneurs before they come and pitch us to be quite familiar with their numbers, because they are, after all, asking for money. So they can affect our faith in them if they are uncertain about their numbers. It is also true that many of them have deep knowledge of something other than finance. So we urge them to surround themselves with people who know that field. And if they need help finding those people, we can often provide ideas.
I'm just curious. So one of the questions that I love to ask people is, what would you tell your 27-year-old self? So looking back with the knowledge you have today, looking back, knowing that you wanted to be in this field, do you have any advice for your 27-year-old self?
That's a great question. I would mainly say something about forbearance. Just keep your eye on the end game. Be aware of where you think you're trying to go, but be really quite thoughtful, patient, and intentional about how you're getting there. Because every single experience along the way, even those that may not be totally positive, are experience you learn a huge amount from. So there's no doubt that figuring out how to do an excellent job with what you're doing right now, while also kind of planning 5 and 10 years out, is a talent, so that you keep your eye on the ball over here, but never fail to think about the future.
Right. So in your experience, what were some of the challenges? Did you have one challenge in particular? And it didn't have to be in this field, but a challenge, how did you overcome? Do you have some tools that you've built in to help you overcome challenges or get around barriers? Did you ever have those times?
Of course. Probably the most instructive thing for me was the moment I left an environment which had been for a very long time an all-female school, 12 years of all single-sex education, and suddenly entered the world that was co-ed in both college and later, and realized that my voice, that had always been very equal for all of those years and up to that point, where I felt I could say whatever I wanted, and that I felt very powerful in that environment, and that I had opportunities for leadership that no one challenged. It was actually very dismaying to hit the next world where that was not the case. And of course, I was going into business, which was where I was in the deep minority. So it wasn't just balance. I was as a woman in the deep minority. So I think that it took me a while actually to really think about this because it was really so very different. So at first it was a certain amount of dismay. How could this be that I'm the same person making the same comments and they don't seem to be hearing these comments? Imagine that. And at some point it became some level of outrage. Mm-hmm. How could it be that we are underfunding or undercapitalizing or paying women less or advancing women at a slower rate? Because it all began to coagulate around the reality of what it was like to be a professional woman in the United States in these years. The only things that I'd say that I did along the way was really learn how to be better than everybody else. Many women, I'm sure, would say that. There was surprising little room for error. So you've got to working harder, faster, smarter than a lot of other people. But also tap into people that can really give you support. I feel that I spent a lot of my career being aware that if I wanted my recommendation to be accepted, it would be very wise to get some advanced support for that before the moment where it needed to be considered. I think the other thing along the way is that I learned that it's very good, whether you are male or female, to be the person that they want in the room when important topics are being discussed. So you just build that reputation over a period of time as someone who will always have something to add to every conversation of note, if they just make sure you're in the room. The flip of that is that if they don't care if you're in the room or if they don't care if you're in the conversation, then they can be pretty dismissive of you. So you want to develop your own attributes, whatever those might be, so that you're the one they want to have in the room.
I think that's a key piece of advice. I really do. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. I appreciate your time today. Where can people find you if they're interested in perhaps seeking out funding?
That's great. So if they're interested in seeking out funding, they can go to goldenseeds.com, where we have information for any entrepreneurs to determine whether they're ready to seek funding, and they can do that right on the site. If there are investors who think they might like to think about being an angel investor, you can also find a place on the website that will tell you how to get information about that. I would also, anyone who's interested can just send an email to info@goldenseeds.com. And we also have a pretty great blog. So people who are interested in following our blog, it's on Medium, blog.goldenseeds.com. We post blogs every week talking about our work, about our amazing companies. It's worth seeing.
Great.
Thank you for asking.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and we'll stay tuned and follow you and see what else you're investing in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's all for this week. Thank you for listening to the Mentors and Moguls podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a minute to rate and review the Mentors and Moguls podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find bonus video episodes on our blog by visiting mentorsandmogulspodcast.com. Until next time, go out and make it a great day.